Tell me where you're hearing this story from. Have you ever experienced something that God changed your life forever? Before we start this journey, find a comfortable place. If you want, close your eyes and take a deep breath. If these stories of God touch your heart, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Here, each story is a warm embrace for the soul, a light in the darkness of the night. Write in the comments, where are you listening to me from and what time is it there? I love to know how far these stories go. And then, tell me, how long did you stay with me? May God bless you and your family. Now, turn down the lights. Today's story begins with a whisper, a promise. In the land of Canaan, the family of Jacob lived a humble life, surrounded by fields and flocks of sheep. Jacob, an elderly man, had 12 sons, but his love for Joseph, the son of his beloved wife Rachel, was unmatched. Joseph, a young and dream-filled boy, was often seen wearing his multicolored coat, a gift from his father. The coat became a symbol of Jacob's special affection for him, but for Joseph's brothers, it became a source of resentment and jealousy. The brothers, older and bitter about Joseph's favored position, often watched him with contempt. They saw him as a reminder of their father's preference, and their hearts grew hard with envy. Joseph, however, remained blissfully unaware of the growing tension. He was filled with dreams of grandeur and future power, dreams that only deepened the rift between him and his brothers. One day, he shared his vision with them. I had a dream that we were all gathering bundles of wheat, and your bundles bowed down to mine, he said, unaware of the anger he was fueling. This dream, coupled with his father's open favoritism, pushed his brothers to the edge. Unable to contain their growing hatred, they devised a plan to rid themselves of Joseph once and for all. One day, when Joseph went to check on his brothers who were tending the flocks, they seized the opportunity. They stripped him of his coat and threw him into a deep cistern, a pit with no water, leaving him alone and helpless. They sat down to eat, indifferent to Joseph's cries for mercy. Their hearts were hardened, and as they ate, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelite traders passing by. In that moment, their decision was made. Instead of killing him, they would sell Joseph as a slave to the traders, ensuring he would be taken far away, never to return. Joseph, in the pit below, could only hear the voices of his brothers as they plotted his fate. Fear overwhelmed him as he realized the full extent of their betrayal. His mind raced with confusion and disbelief. What had he done to deserve this? But deep within, he sensed something else, a glimmer of hope, an unspoken belief that his story was not yet over. The brothers returned to their father, presenting him with the bloodied coat of many colors, telling him that Joseph had been devoured by a wild animal. Jacob was devastated by the news. His heart broke at the thought of losing his favorite son, and he grieved deeply, unwilling to be comforted. But Joseph's journey was just beginning, though none of them knew it yet. Joseph's journey to Egypt began in a state of confusion and terror. Sold to the Ishmaelite traders, he was bound in chains, far from the familiar lands of his father and brothers. The vast, barren desert stretched endlessly before him, the sun scorching his skin, and the weight of the shackles on his wrists served as a constant reminder of his fate. 4 hours each day, he was forced to march with the traders, who were taking him to a distant land, a place he had never seen, where no one knew his name, and where he had no friends. As they crossed the desert, Joseph's mind was consumed by thoughts of his family and the betrayal that had led him here. He had been taken from the life he knew, his father's house, his brothers, and the fields of Canaan, only to be sold as a slave. His heart ached with the uncertainty of what would happen next. He cried out to God for help, but the only answer was the wind blowing across the vast desert, leaving him with no comfort. Finally, after days of travel, they arrived in Egypt. The sight of the great city overwhelmed Joseph. The grand buildings, the strange language spoken by the people, and the exotic customs all served as a reminder that this was a land entirely foreign to him. Joseph was sold to an Egyptian officer named Potiphar, a high-ranking official in Pharaoh's court, a man of power and wealth. Potiphar took Joseph into his home and immediately noticed his exceptional abilities. Joseph was young, strong, and hard-working, and soon he gained the trust of his new master. Potiphar placed him in charge of his household, making Joseph the overseer of his estate. Though Joseph's circumstances were far from ideal, he worked diligently and began to rise in prominence within Potiphar's household. Despite the change in his environment, Joseph never lost his faith. He knew that somehow, in some way, God had a plan for him. Little did he know that the trials he faced would soon lead him down a path that would change the course of his life, and the lives of his family, forever. But while Joseph was thriving in Potiphar's house, another challenge arose. Potiphar's wife, a beautiful and cunning woman, began to take an interest in him. Day after day, she tried to seduce Joseph, but he remained firm, refusing her advances. He knew that to give in would be a betrayal not only to Potiphar, but also to his own moral values. One day, when Potiphar was away, his wife grabbed Joseph by the cloak and demanded that he lie with her. Joseph, realizing that he had no choice but to flee, left his cloak behind and ran out of the house. Enraged and humiliated, Potiphar's wife falsely accused Joseph of attempting to assault her. When Potiphar returned and heard the accusations, he had no choice but to have Joseph thrown into prison, despite knowing the truth. Joseph's world, once again, came crashing down. But even in the dark, cold cell, Joseph maintained his integrity and his faith. His journey in Egypt was far from over, and he held on to the belief that God was with him, even in his darkest hour. In the dim, cold prison, Joseph found himself yet again in the depths of despair. His life had been a series of betrayals, first by his brothers and now by Potiphar's wife, and it seemed as though every door that opened for him was swiftly closed again. Yet, even in the bleakest moments, Joseph's faith did not waver. He had been rejected and abandoned by those who should have cared for him, but he still believed that God had a purpose for his life, one that he could not yet understand. The prison, a place of hopelessness for many, became a strange turning point for Joseph. He wasn't alone. He was surrounded by other prisoners, some of them once high-ranking officials who had fallen out of favor. Among them were the royal cupbearer and the baker of Pharaoh, who had both been imprisoned for offenses against the king. One night, both the cupbearer and the baker had disturbing dreams. They woke up the next morning distressed, unable to interpret what they meant. When Joseph saw their troubled faces, he approached them, and they shared their dreams. As always, Joseph's gift for interpreting dreams was clear to him. The cupbearer's dream involved a vine with 3 branches, which he had seen growing and bearing fruit. He pressed Pharaoh's cup from it, and he presented it to Pharaoh. The baker's dream, on the other hand, was darker. He had seen 3 baskets of baked goods on his head, but birds were eating the bread from the top basket. Listening intently, Joseph explained the meaning of their dreams. To the cupbearer he said, "The 3 branches represent 3 days, and in 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you to your position, and you will once again serve him his cup." To the baker he gave the sad news. "The 3 baskets represent 3 days, and in 3 days, Pharaoh will have you executed, and the birds will feast on your flesh." Before they left, Joseph asked one last thing of the cupbearer. "When things go well for you, remember me and show kindness to me by mentioning me to Pharaoh, for I was forcibly taken from the land of the Hebrews, and I have done nothing to deserve being thrown into this dungeon." As the days passed, Joseph's predictions came true. The cupbearer was reinstated to his position, but once again, Joseph was forgotten. The cupbearer, caught up in his newfound favor, failed to mention Joseph to Pharaoh, leaving him to languish in prison for another 2 years. Despite the passage of time and the growing isolation, Joseph held onto his hope. He continued to live with integrity, proving himself worthy of the trust placed in him, even in the darkest of places. And though he had been forgotten by men, he knew that God had not forgotten him. 2 long years passed, and Joseph remained in prison, his hope flickering like a faint candle in the dark. His time of waiting seemed endless, but little did he know that the moment of his redemption was approaching. Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, was troubled by 2 strange dreams that none of his magicians or wise men could interpret. These dreams disturbed him so much that he could not sleep, and he called for his officials to bring him answers. In the midst of this, the cupbearer, now reinstated to his position, suddenly remembered Joseph. He immediately rushed to Pharaoh, saying, "I have failed to mention this earlier, but while I was in prison, there was a young Hebrew man who interpreted our dreams. Everything he said came true. If you wish, he can interpret your dreams as well." Pharaoh, desperate for answers, summoned Joseph. With no time to waste, Joseph was quickly brought from his prison cell, cleaned, and presented before Pharaoh. The young man, once abandoned and forgotten, now stood in the presence of the most powerful ruler in Egypt. Joseph, however, remained calm and composed, his faith unwavering despite the tumultuous journey he had endured. Pharaoh recounted his dreams. "In my first dream, I saw 7 fat and healthy cows grazing by the Nile, and then 7 thin and sickly cows came up and devoured the fat cows. In my second dream, I saw 7 full and healthy ears of corn growing on a single stalk, and then 7 thin, scorched ears of corn sprouted and devoured the full ears. What do these dreams mean?" Joseph, speaking with the wisdom granted to him by God, replied, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. The 7 fat cows and the 7 healthy ears of corn represent 7 years of abundance and plenty in Egypt. The 7 thin cows and the 7 withered ears of corn represent 7 years of famine that will follow the years of plenty. The famine will be so severe that it will erase all memory of the abundance." Joseph continued, "Pharaoh, let me offer counsel. During the 7 years of plenty, you should appoint a wise and discerning man to store up food in the cities. When the famine comes, the stored food will be used to sustain the people. If you act now, Egypt will survive the coming hardship." Pharaoh, amazed by Joseph's clarity and wisdom, asked his advisors, "Can we find anyone else like this, a man in whom the Spirit of God resides?" The advisors were silent, unable to answer. Pharaoh turned to Joseph, saying, "Since God has shown you all this, there is no one more qualified than you to oversee this plan." With that, Pharaoh placed his signet ring on Joseph's hand, dressed him in fine clothes, and gave him a golden chain. He made him ruler over all the land of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. Joseph's transformation from a betrayed slave to the most powerful man in Egypt had been completed in a moment. Pharaoh gave him the Egyptian name Zaphenath-Paneah and promised him a wife, Asenath, the daughter of a priest of On. Despite all the power he now wielded, Joseph remained humble and faithful to God. He was determined to use his new position not for personal gain, but to ensure the survival of Egypt and his own family, whom he had not forgotten. Under Joseph's leadership, Egypt flourished. The 7 years of abundance arrived just as he had predicted, and the land of Egypt prospered under his careful oversight. Joseph's administration collected vast quantities of grain, storing it in every city across the country, ensuring that when the famine would come, Egypt would be prepared. His efficiency and foresight were unmatched, and he earned the respect and admiration of Pharaoh and the people. During this time, Joseph's life in Egypt also began to stabilize. He married Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, a priest of On. They had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Joseph named his first son Manasseh, meaning, "God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's household," symbolizing how far he had come from his days of suffering. His second son, Ephraim, meaning, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction," reflected his gratitude for the blessings he had received, even in a foreign land. However, as the years of abundance drew to a close, the famine that Joseph had foreseen began to take hold. The crops in Egypt started to fail, and soon, the surrounding regions were devastated. People from all across the land of Canaan, as well as other neighboring countries, began to flock to Egypt, desperate for food. They came to buy grain from Joseph's storehouses, and soon, Egypt became the center of hope for those struggling to survive. Back in Canaan, Jacob and his sons began to feel the weight of the famine. The once fertile lands had become barren, and the food they had stored was running out. Jacob, hearing that there was grain in Egypt, gathered his sons and sent them to buy food. But he refused to send his youngest son, Benjamin, out of fear of losing him, as he had already lost Joseph, the son of his beloved wife Rachel. So, 10 of Joseph's brothers set out on the long journey to Egypt. Little did they know that they were about to encounter the brother they had betrayed years earlier, the brother they had sold into slavery. As they arrived in Egypt and presented themselves to Joseph to purchase grain, Joseph recognized them immediately, but they did not recognize him. Now dressed in Egyptian royal garb, speaking the language of the Egyptians, Joseph had changed beyond recognition. As the brothers stood before him, Joseph's heart was overwhelmed with a mixture of emotions: anger, betrayal, love, and a deep, unresolved pain. He could see the guilt in their eyes, and yet, he was unsure of how to proceed. Should he reveal himself to them immediately? Or should he test their hearts, to see if they had truly changed since the day they had sold him into slavery? Joseph decided to test them. He accused them of being spies, coming to Egypt to inspect the land, and demanded that they bring their youngest brother to prove their story. He locked them up in prison for 3 days, hoping that this time apart would allow them to reflect on the past and the betrayal they had committed. As the brothers sat in prison, they began to confess their guilt to one another. "We are being punished for what we did to Joseph," said Reuben, the eldest, to the others. "We saw his anguish when he pleaded with us, but we refused to listen. Now we are paying the price." The guilt weighed heavily on their hearts, and they began to realize the true cost of their actions. But Joseph, listening to their words from his chamber, was deeply moved. He could hear the sorrow in their voices, the regret that had taken root in their hearts. He began to wonder if this was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when his brothers would truly understand the consequences of their betrayal. After 3 days in prison, Joseph released his brothers, but with a condition. He demanded that one of them stay behind as a guarantee, while the others returned to Canaan to bring back their youngest brother, Benjamin. Joseph's heart ached as he saw them, realizing that he was so close to reuniting with his family, yet still hesitant to fully reveal himself. The brothers, shocked by Joseph's demand, feared for their lives. The famine was severe, and they knew they had no choice but to obey if they wanted to save their families. However, Jacob, their father, was not willing to let Benjamin go so easily. Benjamin was his youngest son, and his most beloved, the only remaining child of Rachel, his true love. The thought of losing him too filled Jacob with dread. Back in Canaan, when the brothers returned and told their father what had happened, Jacob was devastated. He did not want to lose another son, especially after the grief of Joseph's loss. "Why did you bring this trouble on me?" Jacob cried. "Why did you tell the man you had another brother? You know how much I loved Rachel and how much I can't bear to lose Benjamin too." Reuben, the eldest, pleaded with his father. "Father, let us take Benjamin with us. I will take full responsibility for him. If anything happens to him, I will be the one to blame. You can hold me accountable." But Jacob, deeply reluctant and torn, could not bear the thought of sending his beloved son to Egypt. It took several days for the situation to become increasingly desperate. The grain they had brought from Egypt was running out, and there was no other choice but to send Benjamin along with the brothers. Finally, after much pleading and with a heavy heart, Jacob agreed. "If it must be so, then take him," he said. "But may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man so that he will release your brother and Benjamin. As for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved." Before they left, Jacob gave his sons gifts for the Egyptian governor: balm, honey, spices, myrrh, and almonds. These were gifts of goodwill, meant to show respect to the man who had helped them. Jacob's heart was still heavy with worry, but he trusted in the guidance of God, hoping for the safe return of his family. The journey to Egypt was filled with uncertainty and fear. The brothers felt a sense of guilt and anxiety weighing on them, unsure of what awaited them when they returned to Joseph's palace. They were haunted by the memories of their betrayal, and feared they would not be forgiven. But at the same time, there was a glimmer of hope. They did not yet know it, but the reconciliation they had longed for was closer than ever. As the brothers arrived once again in Egypt, they were filled with mixed emotions. The fear of the unknown gripped their hearts, while the hope of reconciliation with Joseph stirred in their minds. They had returned to the place where their past sins had begun, and now they were unsure of how they would be received. But they knew they had no choice. If they did not go through with this, their families would starve. When they arrived at Joseph's palace, they were once again greeted with an air of formality and grandeur, which only deepened their anxiety. Joseph had prepared a grand feast for them, but they did not understand why. They assumed it was some sort of trap, a test to confirm their guilt. They feared that Joseph would take Benjamin as a slave or worse, imprison them all. Joseph, however, observed his brothers closely. He could see how their faces had changed since their first visit. There was a sincerity in their eyes that had not been there before. As they entered the grand hall, Joseph's emotions surged. He saw Benjamin, his younger brother, standing before him. Benjamin, the son of Rachel, the one he had been longing to see. The moment was almost too much to bear. But Joseph did not immediately reveal himself. Instead, he decided to test their hearts further. He instructed his servants to secretly place a silver cup in Benjamin's sack, and then accuse him of theft when they were about to depart. The brothers, unaware of the plan, continued to eat and talk, not knowing the test that Joseph had set in motion. As the brothers were about to leave the palace, Joseph's steward came running after them, accusing them of stealing the governor's silver cup. Shocked and confused, the brothers denied any wrongdoing, swearing their innocence. They insisted that if the cup was found with any of them, that person should die, and the rest of them would become slaves. The steward searched their sacks one by one, and when he reached Benjamin's sack, the silver cup was found. The brothers were horrified. They could not understand why this was happening, and their hearts were filled with dread. They fell to the ground before Joseph, ready to face whatever punishment awaited them. At that moment, Judah, the brother who had once been the most vocal in selling Joseph into slavery, stepped forward. With a heavy heart, he pleaded with Joseph, "Please, my lord, let me take the place of Benjamin. I cannot bear to see my father suffer again. If we return without Benjamin, our father will surely die of grief. Please, I beg you, take me instead." Judah's words were filled with genuine sorrow and selflessness. He was no longer the man who had sold his brother. In that moment, he was willing to sacrifice himself for the sake of his family. Joseph listened to his brother, and his heart was deeply moved. He had seen enough. The brothers had truly changed. Unable to hold his emotions any longer, Joseph ordered everyone to leave the room. Alone with his brothers, he finally revealed his true identity. "I am Joseph," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "The one you sold into slavery. But do not be distressed. It was not you who sent me here, but God. He sent me before you to save lives, to provide for you during this time of famine." The brothers were stunned. They could not believe their ears. Joseph, the brother they had betrayed, was standing before them alive and in a position of power. They feared that he would seek revenge, but instead, he spoke with forgiveness in his heart. "Do not be afraid," Joseph continued. "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to save many lives. Now, go back to our father and tell him that I am alive. Bring him and all our family here to live in the land of Egypt. There will be plenty for everyone." Joseph embraced his brothers, and in that moment, the years of pain and betrayal melted away. The family was whole again. The years of separation had finally come to an end, and Joseph had not only forgiven them but had been instrumental in ensuring their survival. The journey back to Canaan was filled with excitement, fear, and anticipation. The brothers, still stunned by Joseph's revelation, now carried with them the most incredible news of all. Joseph, their long-lost brother, was alive and well, and not only that, he had been made a ruler in Egypt. They had come full circle, from betraying their brother to being saved by him, and now they had the incredible task of telling their father that Joseph, whom he had mourned for years, was alive. When the brothers arrived home, they immediately sought out their father, Jacob, whose heart had been heavy for so many years. They told him the extraordinary news. "Joseph is alive. He is ruler over all the land of Egypt." Jacob, overwhelmed by disbelief, initially could not comprehend what they were saying. His heart had been broken by the loss of Joseph, and the idea that his son could be alive was too much to grasp. His mind raced, and for a moment, he could not believe his ears. But when they showed him the wagons and the gifts that Joseph had sent to prove the truth of their story, Jacob's heart stirred with a mixture of joy and amazement. "It is enough," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." With his faith renewed and a joy he had not known in years, Jacob prepared to leave Canaan. His family, though deeply saddened by the famine that had gripped the land, now had a reason to hope once more. They gathered their belongings, ready to embark on the long journey to Egypt, where they would reunite with Joseph and live in safety. As they traveled toward Egypt, Jacob stopped at Beersheba to offer sacrifices to God. In a dream that night, God spoke to him. "Jacob, Jacob," he called. "Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there. I will go with you to Egypt, and I will surely bring you back again." This divine reassurance filled Jacob's heart with peace. He knew that his journey was part of a greater plan, and that God was with him, guiding him toward a new chapter in the life of his family. When Jacob and his sons arrived in Egypt, they were met by Joseph, who came in a chariot to greet them. The sight of his father brought tears to Joseph's eyes, and he embraced him with all the love and tenderness he had kept hidden for so many years. "Father," Joseph said, "I am your son, Joseph, whom you thought was dead. God has been with me through all of this, and now we are reunited." The moment was filled with an overwhelming sense of joy and relief. Joseph's heart swelled with love and gratitude, knowing that his family had been restored. He took his father and brothers to the land of Goshen, where they were given the best land in Egypt, a place of abundance where they would be safe from the famine. Joseph provided for his entire family, ensuring that they lacked for nothing. His brothers, once filled with guilt and regret, now had a second chance to live in peace and prosperity. They began to see their brother not as the one they had betrayed, but as the man who had saved them all. In the years that followed, Jacob lived in Egypt, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, seeing the fulfillment of God's promises. He had witnessed the reconciliation of his family, and with that, his heart was finally at peace. And Joseph, the son who had once been lost, became the key to their survival and the cornerstone of their family's future. Jacob lived many years in Egypt, surrounded by his sons and their families. Though the land had been ravaged by famine, the family of Jacob had found refuge in the land of Goshen, where Joseph, now a powerful ruler in Egypt, ensured that they were well cared for. The family had been reunited and, for the first time in many years, Jacob felt a deep peace in his heart. His sons, whom he thought he had lost forever, were now by his side, and his beloved Joseph, the son he had mourned for so long, was alive. As Jacob grew older, he felt the weight of time pressing on him. He knew his days were numbered. Before he died, he wanted to bless each of his sons and prepare them for the future. So, he called for his sons to gather around him, to receive his final blessings and words of wisdom. The family came together, with Joseph by his side, as Jacob spoke to each of his sons. He began with Reuben, the firstborn, and spoke words of correction and guidance, acknowledging his strength but also reminding him of his past failures. Then, one by one, Jacob blessed each son, speaking to their individual strengths, weaknesses, and destinies. His words were not just about inheritance, but about the future of their descendants and the paths they would walk. When Jacob reached Joseph, he embraced him with great affection. "I never thought I would see your face again, but God has been so gracious to me," he said. Then, he turned to Joseph's two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Joseph had brought them before Jacob, and Jacob, despite his old age, extended his hands and placed them on the boys, blessing them as if they were his own sons. "May God make you as fruitful as your father has been," he said, and with that, he gave them his blessing, giving them a special place in his family's legacy. After the blessings, Jacob asked to be buried with his ancestors in the cave of Machpelah, where his father Isaac and grandfather Abraham were buried. It was a place of great significance for their family, a final resting place that symbolized their connection to the land of Canaan, the land God had promised to their forefathers. Joseph promised his father that he would fulfill his wishes, and Jacob, satisfied with the knowledge that his family would continue to grow and thrive, peacefully passed away. His sons mourned deeply for their father, but there was also a sense of closure, knowing that Jacob had seen his family restored and that God's promises had been fulfilled. After the death of Jacob, the family of Israel entered a period of mourning, but also of reflection. Joseph, the man who had risen from the depths of despair and betrayal to become a powerful ruler in Egypt, now found himself facing the final chapter of his own life. His brothers, still haunted by the sins of their past, felt a renewed sense of guilt. They feared that, with their father gone, Joseph might seek vengeance for what they had done to him years before. But Joseph, understanding the depths of his brothers' remorse and the transformation they had undergone, sought to ease their fears. He called them to him and spoke gently but firmly. "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Joseph's words were filled with forgiveness and understanding. He had long since let go of the anger and resentment he once held toward them. Instead, he saw the bigger picture, how God had used his suffering to bring about the preservation of many people, including his own family. The brothers, hearing his words, were comforted and reassured. Their guilt was lifted, and they came to understand the true meaning of Joseph's forgiveness. Joseph spent his remaining years in Egypt, continuing to govern with wisdom and grace. He had witnessed the unfolding of God's plan in his own life and the lives of his family, and he remained a man of deep faith and integrity. His role as a protector and provider for his family was not just a duty but a calling, one he embraced wholeheartedly. As he neared the end of his life, Joseph gathered his brothers around him. His health had begun to fail, and he knew that his time on earth was short. He made them promise something important. "I am about to die," he said, "but God will surely come to your aid, and he will bring you up from this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." Joseph's faith in the promises of God remained unwavering, even in his final moments. He knew that the time would come when his descendants would leave Egypt, the land of their bondage, and return to the land promised to their forefathers. Joseph, though now a powerful man in Egypt, had never forgotten his true heritage, and he wanted his family to know that they were still part of God's divine plan. He then made his brothers swear an oath, saying, "When God comes to your aid, and you return to the land of Canaan, take my bones with you." Joseph, though far from home, wanted to be buried with his ancestors, in the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were laid to rest. It was a final act of faith, a testament to his belief that the promises of God would one day come to pass, and that his family would one day be reunited in the land of promise. Joseph's death marked the end of an era, but his legacy lived on. He died at the age of 110, a long life filled with purpose, suffering, redemption, and fulfillment. His body was embalmed, and he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. But his final wish, that his bones be taken to the land of Canaan, was carried out many years later, when the Israelites finally left Egypt during the Exodus. Joseph's life, marked by his faith in God and his unwavering belief in the power of forgiveness, would continue to inspire generations to come. His story was one of transformation, from a boy sold into slavery by his own brothers to a man who saved his family and an entire nation. He had experienced pain, but he had also learned the profound truth that, through God's guidance, even the darkest moments could bring about incredible good.